Sure. Oh,
So,
I was wondering, could we say a prayer for Ottawa?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I can say the first prayer for Canada. Maybe that would.
oh, that'd be great.
It's a great
Yeah.
idea.
Okay. Praise be to thee, O my God. Verily, these are thy servants who are attracted by the fragrances of thy mercifulness, are enkindled by the fire burning in the tree of thy singleness, and whose eyes are brightened by beholding the splendors of a light shining in the sunlight of thy oneness. O Lord, loose their tongues to make mention of thee amongst thy people. Suffer them to speak forth thy praise with thy grace and loving kindness. Assist them with the cohorts of thine angels, strengthen their loins in thy service, and make them the signs of thy guidance amongst thy creatures. Verily, thou art the all-powerful, the most exalted, the ever-forgiving, the all-merciful.
Okay, thank you. All right, so tonight we're going to look at something called the 4 reminders. These are gifts to us from Tibetan Buddhism. See what you think of them. So the first reminder is precious human birth. According to Tibetan Buddhism, our human state is only one of many possible modes of being. They teach that our current human existence is one brief moment in a long spiritual journey composed of millions of lives. We may be human beings at the moment, but since beginningless time, we have been trapped in the prison of samsara and have been cycling through its various types of existence. Within the Tibetan tradition, samsara is seen as being composed of 6 realms. The 3 lower realms, including those of the hell beings, the hungry ghosts, and the animals. And the 3 higher realms, those of humans, demigods, and gods. Of all the possible samsaric states that we could be born into, the human one is the most rare and the most fortunate. Oops. Okay. So I think I'm going to go forwards in the alphabet tonight. So I'm going to start with Margaret Boland, number 1.
Great. The 4 reminders, reading 1. The 3 lower realms allow no opportunity to hear or understand the teachings of the Dharma. Beings there lack leisure or other supportive circumstances to aid or encourage practice. They experience too much suffering. On the other hand, the God realms provide no incentive to practice. Beings in these realms are so infatuated with and intoxicated by sensual pleasure and bliss that the thought of escaping from this or any other state of cyclic existence never occurs to them. In the human realms, however, we taste both sweet and sour. We know enough about suffering to want change, yet the suffering isn't so acute that we can't do anything about it. Precious human birth provides a freedom and a leisure to practice that cannot be found in other realms of experience, either the 3 lower realms with their immense suffering, or the non-human higher realms with their false contentment. Chagda Tulku, Gates to Buddhist Practice.
Okay, so that is this diagram or chart that Heather printed off. She liked it so much. It's interesting to look at the dominating defilement, as they call it. So in the hell realm, it's anger and aggression. In the hungry ghost realm, it's passion and hunger. In the animal realm, it's delusion. In the human realm, it's passion again. And in the jealous God realm, it's jealousy, paranoia. And finally, in the God realm, not the big G that we use, but devas, as they call them, pride and delusion. And so it goes on to tell you a little bit more about the type of suffering that you can experience each. Now, from a Westerner point of view, you're thinking, seriously, 6 realms? You know, this doesn't make any sense. But think about it in terms of psychology and the possible states of mind that a person can enter. That's why I'm focusing on this defilement issue here, or the type of suffering. That will tell you that certain people are really stuck in passion or in anger or whatever it happens to be. So even though we're in the human realm physically, we may be in one of these others psychologically. Now, I also have a second one that I grabbed from the internet. It goes in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to cover that together with you. I'll let you look at that yourself. So again, that idea about the psychological state of being, it's actually one that I got from Chogyam Trungpa, who was a very famous enlightened master who taught in the United States for many years. And I think he would suggest that you don't have to be reborn in another world necessarily, as these are places that you can go within this world. And you can also apply it as a Baha'i, I think, to give you a sense of where we might be going in the next world. What type of existence would be appropriate to the level of development we've attained here. So as a Baha'i, those are the strategies I use when I'm looking at these levels or these realms. A Buddhist probably wouldn't necessarily go along with it, but anyway. So despite this golden opportunity that human beings have of understanding and practicing the Dharma, there are many people presently living on the planet who are suffering and confused with no access to spiritual teachings to help them grow and make sense of their lives. Tibetan Buddhism identifies 4 obstacles that prevent human beings from practicing the Dharma. Here they are. So the wrong view is such as believing that a purely materialistic approach to life will bring happiness, or that killing animals or harming other people will have no consequences for yourself. There's a skepticism about spirituality and religion. Intellectual sophistication or scholarly learning does not enable one to acquire or maintain spiritual faith. Clever but cynical people find it difficult to put their trust in anything, and thus do not have the openness and receptivity necessary to look for a spiritual practice. Being born in a dark age, a time and a place in which the Dharma is not available. Or 4, having a beleaguered life, as through extreme mental or physical illness, economic deprivation, social degradation, or political oppression, such that one cannot even begin to think about spirituality. So all of these are currently at play in the world and will affect individuals who live side by side differently. So if our lives are not impeded or bogged down by any of these obstacles, then not only will we have a precious human birth, but we will also enjoy a human birth that is free and well favored. If this is our situation, and if we are in a condition and frame of mind in which spiritual practice is actually a possibility, we are urged to appreciate the rare opportunity this provides and are encouraged not to waste it. Okay, so let's look at the second of the reminders, which is impermanence. When we were young and growing into adulthood, especially in modern culture, we are conditioned not to think about or even notice death. Our culture's obsession with youth, beauty, and materialism leads us to the view that disease, old age, and death are not part of our own future. Death is hidden from sight, trivialized, or transformed into adrenaline-producing entertainment that merely feeds the devouring demon of consumerism. And yet, the fact remains that all of us are facing the specter of death right now. Okay, Leslie Cole, you get to read this uplifting one, number 2.
Okay. Chagdu Tulku advises us to contemplate that all people will soon die, no matter how powerful, famous, or wealthy they may be now. All of them will die, and none will be able to take anything of what they are, what they own, or what they have accomplished with them. Little more than a century from now, everyone currently living on the planet will be gone. In our own personal case, there will definitely come a day, and for some of us, it is not far off, when we will take our last breath. After we die, people will quickly forget about us, and in a short period of time, no one will even remember that we ever existed. And sometime later, not long in cosmic terms, even our Earth will perish, and life will cease to exist here altogether. Wow.
Yeah. Remember I told you that Buddhism wasn't pessimistic, it was realistic. There's a dose of it for you. But it gets better. So from a Buddhist perspective, it is important to understand the impermanent nature of our circumstances, not just intellectually, but deep in our bones. Tukul Urgyen suggests that we contemplate the following analogy from Padmasambhava's Karling Shitro. Now, this is a challenging piece. Okay, David Erickson, let's see what you do with this one.
Okay, number 3. Imagine that you are standing on a half-inch ledge on a sheer cliff overlooking an almost bottomless abyss with a roaring river raging below. You cannot bear to look down. Only your toes rest on the ledge, while your hands grasp 2 handfuls of grass the size of a goat's beard. You are hanging onto these 2 handfuls of scrub grass that represent your lifespan and life force. At the same time, impermanence in the form of 2 rats gnaws away the grass you are clinging to, piece by piece. Once the grass is consumed, there will be nothing left to hold on to. There is only one way to go, to plunge into the nearly bottomless pit in the raging river. So you hang on while the rats eat up the grass, blade by blade. You have no chance of survival whatsoever. This is our current situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought this was worth including because it was so graphic. Anyway, so why is the awareness of death so important to Buddhists? Because it leads us to examine our own lives and priorities. If we choose to remain unaware of our own mortality, we have the impression that we have all the time in the world. This allows us to follow our habitual patterns, drifting along and finding gratification, confirmation, and material well-being wherever we can. But when death is staring us in the face, we suddenly perceive what is truly important in our lives. Okay, I guess that's Belinda's turn now. Number 4.
Yeah, that last one was charming. My family knows that I can't even watch movies where there's somebody falling out of an airplane or something.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they think it's funny. Number 4, there is an acute sadness and sense of loss in the recognition that all life is destined for death. But such an awareness brings with it a sense of immediacy, and also freedom. Since one realizes that the future really is uncertain, the present moment takes on an increased importance. One sees that this moment is, in fact, all that one has or ever can have. The rest is just empty speculation. And since everything that one is and does is one day going to come to nothing, one is free to be whatever and do whatever exists in one's heart to be and do. This is exactly what the spiritual path is about, to live increasingly in the present, and in this present, to become fully and completely who we are, the person that it is our fate to become, the person already written in our heart of hearts. Thus it is that awareness of death leads us powerfully to the practice of Dharma, and thereby through the discovery of true being. As one of the Kadam masters of old put it, at first meditation on impermanence leads you to search for the Dharma. In the middle, it inspires you to practice. In the end, it helps you to attain the goal. And that's from Reginald Ray, Indestructible Truth, page 251 and 52.
So I just want to throw in a cautionary note here. This statement, free to be whatever and do whatever exists in one's heart to be and do. Now that's not the same kind of freedom that we're seeing exhibited in our city at the moment. This is a freedom that is constrained by many, many ethical guidelines, which we will see later. And the use of the word heart is very important because that is where the Buddha nature resides, which we will see later is for each of us, just as it is for Baha'is to realize or actualize the trust of God that we've been given. So it's not quite the freedom that people in the West might think of at the moment. So our sense of impermanence is only deepened when we scrutinize our individual selves. As he walked his path to enlightenment, the Buddha came to realize that the human personality is composed of 5 physical and mental factors, known as bundles or aggregates. In Pali, it's khandhas. In Sanskrit, it's skandhas. You may have heard those terms at some point. Collectively, he recognized them as the cause of human suffering, which is the second noble truth. Okay, how about Alan Fuller for number 5?
Sure. And how, monks, are the 5 aggregates of grasping suffering? They are as follows. The aggregate of grasping that is form, the aggregate of grasping that is feeling, the aggregate of grasping that is perception, the aggregate of grasping that is mental formations, the aggregate of grasping that is consciousness. These are, in short, the 5 aggregates of grasping that are suffering. And that, monks, is called the noble truth of suffering. This is the long discourses of Buddha.
Great, thank you. So I don't know if it's quite coming across in the way that he's articulating it here, but the idea is that every time you become aware of form, something in you is reaching out and grabbing that and making it into a form in your mind. The same thing with your feelings. They could just go by without any impact on you, but as soon as you focus on them, you make them your own. They become alive. And that's with your perceptions, and it's also true of any mental formations that you make. or consciousness in general. It's all a form of grasping from this particular point of view. And so here's the list with the Pali and Sanskrit terms. These are central to the Buddhist view of life and the way that a human being is structured. So ordinarily, people do not see these bundles as the root of suffering, as the basis of the ego, self, or personality. However, with his finely tuned consciousness, the Buddha maintained that they are not I, me, or myself. Unenlightened humans tend to look upon the flow of agreeable sense objects as pleasurable and only perceive their ending as suffering or dukkha. The spiritually ennobled, on the other hand, see the transcending of the skandhas and self-objects as what is truly pleasurable. For them, nirvana is the blissful state beyond all conditioned phenomena of the round of rebirth. So this comes back to the idea of non-self. In his second sermon, the Buddha explained that if the five skandhas were truly ourself, they would not tend to sickness and would be totally controllable by our will, which is clearly not the case. Moreover, since each skandha is subject to change, it is inappropriate to regard it as this is mine, this is I, this is myself. So those two factors are something that he focuses on to really underline how impermanent our lives are. They're not controllable, and they are subject to change. So there's no permanent self in the Buddhist view. This is a really difficult concept for Baha'is, I think, to accept. Because we all have a notion of a soul, even though it might be a bit ephemeral, we just don't have a clear sense of what it is. But we've been taught that there is such a thing and that we can become more and more aware of it. Oh, this seems to be flying in the face of that. In the Buddha's day, the spiritual quest was largely seen as the search for identifying and liberating.
Sorry, Mark. Leslie had her hand up.
Oh, did she? Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't see that. Sorry, go ahead, Leslie.
Oh, well, I wanted to ask about form. Is form anything? Like, is form a flower, or could form be a tree? I mean, isn't some meditation focused on, a beautiful form, even then when you know it's not permanent, but still it's a focus of upliftment or meditation, whatever.
Depends on what you do with the form, but form itself is not permanent. Flowers do not last very long. And Baha'u'llah counseled us to go to take a look at some of the civilizations which are no longer thriving. To become aware of the fact that everything is impermanent. So don't put your trust in that. Essentially, that's what the Buddha is saying. And this is something that you have to meditate on, to really contemplate, allow to sink in and change your worldview.
Oh,
Takes some
Mark,
time. It's not a quick thing. Harold, did you?
yeah, just would like to share something. If you think of these as processes, I think there's a little more continuity between this and maybe ordinary consciousness, or so we tend to reify and make permanent our experience of the flower, and it's both our processes of perceiving the flower and the flower itself are in process. So they're changing, but if you say all these things are grasping, it makes it look like don't do them at all. I think we have to engage in processes, but I think we could take this a little too seriously, and it would sort of make you want to become a completely passive and not pay attention to anything around you. But if I think of these as processes, I think that's what the metaphysic of Buddhism is. It's a process view of the world. Therefore, don't be attached to any one experience or interpretation of experience or vision or idea. But elsewhere in the Buddhist writing, we're supposed to pay attention to things like the Dharma and things that the Buddha said. So I think that we can overdo any one of these teachings.
Mhm. Oh,
Even
this
if-
is,
Yeah.
yeah, that's sort of like, do you just walk past all beauty because none of it matters and all of it is, if you're talking about not being attached to form, then none of it matters. You walk past, you have no response, you have like nothing matters. You have no attachment to the baby because you know it's going to grow to be a child, to be a man, to be a woman. So you have no attachment. You're complete, like, I don't care. They mean nothing to me. Is that what you're supposed to be if you're enlightened?
No.
Well, that's a relief.
Yeah. It would look like that on the surface, but I think Harold's got a good point that this is, let's not consider this to be the be all and the end all about Buddhism. There's a great deal more to say that will paint the picture in a more rounded way. But the idea is that you have a detached approach to life. Everything around you is going to change. So don't cling to it. Don't grasp it as if it's going to make you who you are.
Mark, we could say these are all verbs or processes, not nouns that we can possess forever. Otherwise, I can't use this stuff, but I'm trying to figure out how to use it. If it's a good idea to think of things as in process and verbs and activities that change. And so I cannot completely bank on my fixed version of any of these things.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Interesting way of putting it.
It's in process.
Yeah. Don't
Mark-
count on any of them being the same 2 weeks from now.
Mark, David and Belinda have their hand up.
Oh, I see.
And
Okay.
or-
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, what this has all made me thought of is that, in a very real sense, we're dealing with the Buddhist concept of emptiness. And, we're really, in Buddhism, to say that emptiness is form and form is emptiness. And I forgot now what I was really going to say, but the whole idea of emptiness is actually very real. After all, everything. One of the principal things about ourselves, about the world here and the universe, is motion. Everything is in motion all the time. And if motion were to stop, everything would end. There'd be nothing. Carlo Rovelli, the physicist, refers to everything. We see everything as separate and individual, whereas actually there's a blurring, and we don't see that blurring, and where everything is connected with everything else, which we've often heard. And if it were not for relationship, there would be nothing again. So the whole idea of things separate is not a reality. And this in part is what is meant by emptiness. So I just thought I would bring that out. Talk about a process. Yeah. We need the physical world. We're born into it, and it's there for a reason. Okay, but it seems that the reason for it being there is to get out of it. You know, and
It's a 7 word.
yeah, and so you know, and this is something that I think is reflected in the Baha'i writings and in another way. And I'll
Well,
stop.
David, you're what I'm noticing is that you're jumping the gun a little bit. These are topics that I'm going to start unpacking in more detail next week and the week after. Emptiness is one of the most difficult, most subtle topics that Buddhism has to offer. So this is a nice little taste of it, but it's not the full story by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, when we say that the self doesn't really exist,
Yeah, that's the basis
we're
of
really
it.
talking about emptiness.
Can I add something here? A few weeks ago, I heard someone on the radio talk about 7 words. And the 7 words are, and he just actually referred to them. Everything is connected.
Yeah.
Everything changes. Pay attention.
That's good. That's a nice way to convey the Buddhist strategy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very nice. 7 words, eh? Oh. Okay. Well, let's continue on with the form of my talk, even though it doesn't mean anything. It's totally impermanent. So in the Buddha's day, the spiritual quest was largely seen as the search for identifying and liberating a person's true self. Such an entity was proposed as a person's permanent inner nature, the source of true happiness and the autonomous inner controller of a person's actions, inner elements, and faculties. This true self would be in full control of itself. In Brahmanism, this self is known as the Atman, and was seen as a universal self identical with Brahman, which is the totality, if you like. In Jainism, it was understood as the individual life principle, the jiva. So let's go back here and see if we can get Lori Hanson-Tripp to read this next one for us. Number 6.
Reading number 6. The Buddha argued that anything subject to change, anything involved with the disharmony of mental pain, anything not autonomous and totally controllable by its own or an owner's wishes, could not be such a perfect true self or what in any way pertained or belonged to it. Moreover, to take anything as being such is to lay the basis for much suffering, for what one fondly takes as one's permanent essential self, or its secure possession, all actually changes in undesired ways in the Buddhist sutras. Literally everything is seen as non-self, even nirvana, when this is known, then liberation, nirvana, is attained by total non-attachment.
So the Buddha's teaching concerning the 5 bundles as non-self is not only intended to undermine the Brahmanical and Jain concepts of self, but also much more commonly held conceptions and deep-rooted feelings of I-ness. Okay, Heather, please. Number 7.
To feel that however much one changes in life from childhood onwards, some essential part remains constant and unchanged as the real me, is to have a belief in a permanent self. To act as if only other people die and to ignore the inevitability of one's own death is to act as if one has had a permanent self. To relate changing mental phenomena to a substantial self which owns them, I am worried, happy, angry, is to have a self-concept. To build an identity based on one's bodily appearance or abilities, or on one's sensitivities, ideas or beliefs, actions or intelligence, etc., is to take them as part of an I. Peter Harvey, Introduction to Buddhism.
I don't know about you, but this one particularly makes me uncomfortable. I realize how many of these things I use to construct a sense of self. That's under attack in this religion. And I suppose one of the things that Baha'is in the future will have to do is to sort out to what degree Baha'i agrees with this. Because there's a strong move to become non-attached, to become detached from the world. That's a very apparent strand within the Baha'i writings, particularly Baha'u'llah's writings. But to what extent does it go? Does it go as far as Buddhism goes? That's what isn't quite clear to me at this point, but I'm hoping will become clear.
Mark, can I comment? Or you want to go on? You want to go on?
Well, no, I have a couple of people with hands up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go to David Oak first, and then Joey, and then you.
With the Baha'i faith, I think just 2 quick points. Abdul Baha said the only prison is the prison of self. And I think the one word you could include with the idea of detachment is transcendence. That you're not denying anything, you're expanding. You're going to a higher level.
Nice.
You know where if you're focused on yourself, sort of the forces of the ether or whatever can't flow through you.
Okay.
That's it for now. And
yeah, those are good points. Okay, Joey, what do you think?
Mine's a very simple question. As Baha'i, we strive for detachment. Is there a difference between detachment and non-attachment?
I have seen the word detached used in some of the readings that I'm looking at. I would personally have no problem making them equal, but I'm not 100% sure whether a Buddhist would make that. It would depend on how you spin the word detached. And I'm using it in a Baha'i sense from my own readings over the decades. It seems to be that there's a close alignment to me. But I could be proved wrong later. I don't know. Okay, Harold, you had a point?
Yeah, that I think that this anatman part of the Buddhist faith is very, very complicated. Here's something that the Buddha said himself in the Dhammapada. In days gone by, this mind of mine used to stray wherever selfish desire or lust or pleasure would lead it. Today, this mind does not stray and is under the harmony of control, even as a wild elephant is controlled by the trainer. So, and then the Buddha follows this right up. Next quote: guard well your mind, uplift yourself from your lower self, even as an elephant draws himself out of a muddy swamp. So the Buddha is talking about something that can observe a lower self, right? He got stuck in the mud, or he got stuck in desire. That's that higher inner observer. In other words, Buddhism, no matter how you interpret the Anatman doctrine, has some sort of reality within. That's what. So when Abdu'l-Baha talks about the reality of man, he's talking about our spirit or our soul, And I think the Buddha has something equivalent, although it's slipperier. But without this inner observer or higher mind that watches the lower mind suffer, there would be no point in Buddhism.
True.
The Dharma that the Buddha is teaching has to land on something, right?
Yeah.
It has to land on your higher awareness. Let's call it that, or your inner observer, but there's no way of getting around a soul or spirit in some form, or else why listen to anything the Buddha said? Anyway, sorry, that's how I deal with anatman. It means don't get attached to lower forms of yourself, which are going to change. But there's a part of you that's higher than all that.
Interestingly enough, Ken Wilber, who is a Buddhist, refers to it as the witness.
That's the same thing, I think. Yeah, inner observer or witness. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you say, my brain is not working very well today, there's part of you that's higher than your brain, evaluating its function, right?
True. That's it. I mean, as you say, it's a subtle subject. Anyway, Alan, okay, what do you got?
Yeah, I was thinking that we're being told to create a new world order, which means that we're going to become detached from everything that is now. And perhaps what is being suggested is that we should learn this idea of detachment from what is, because it's soon to be what's gone.
Good point.
Mark, Leslie has your hand up.
Okie dokie, Leslie, go ahead.
So if we're not supposed to have an I or a self that's attached to any beliefs or ideas, then we cannot have a Baha'i identity. I am a Baha'i. I am a Buddhist, right? We cannot hold on to those, cling to them, grasp onto them, think that they're important, because they're fleeting and will go, pass away.
But at the same time, I understand what you're saying. I'm thinking, though, a Buddhist would say, hold on to it lightly. Don't cling to it like it's the only thing saving you. I don't know. It's a mindset that they're preaching here, I think. But I mean, you're raising an excellent point. Okay, so let's struggle on, shall we? I'm a little bit worried about whether I'm going to get through my material tonight. Let me see here.
Be detached, Mark, be detached from all that. Just kidding.
Okay, I'm just catching up with my notes here. Okay, in the passage that's coming, number 8, which I'm going to ask Lisa to read tonight. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping over Ingrid. Ingrid Hauk to read in a minute. In this passage, the Buddha explains that it is man's clinging to each of the 5 bundles or skandhas that creates agitation when they reveal their impermanent nature. The equivalent Baha'i term to such clinging is attachment. Okay, take it away, Ingrid.
Reading number 8. The uninstructed worldling, who is not a seer of the noble ones, and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, who is not a seer of superior persons, and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, regards form as self, or self as possessing form, or form as in self, or self as in form. That form of his changes and alters. With the change and alteration of form, his consciousness becomes preoccupied with the change of form. Agitation and a constellation of mental states born of preoccupation with the change of form, remain obsessing his mind. Because his mind is obsessed, he is frightened, distressed, and anxious, and through clinging, he becomes agitated. It's the Buddha from the Connected Discourses of the Buddha.
Thank you. Just as an aside, this is not the kind of dialogue or pronouncement that we expect from most of the manifestations of God, seems to me. I can't imagine Jesus ever saying something like this, or Moses. This tells you something about the nature of the people that he was addressing, that they could understand these subtleties, that they were interested in them. Anyway, just a quick aside. So the Buddha goes on to repeat the same logic for the other four bundles: feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. In each case, he highlights the value of non-clinging in relation to the bundles. So the equivalent Baha'i term to such non-clinging, I believe, is detachment. Okay, so number 9, it just goes further here, and now we're ready to hear from Lisa.
The instructed noble disciple does not regard form thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. That form of his changes and alters. With the change and alteration of form, there do not arise in him sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. In such a way, bhikkhus, that there is non-agitation through non-clinging.
So that may be the clue as to how the Dalai Lama is the way he is. Look at the suffering he's had to endure. He's got the weight of his entire country on his shoulders. And yet his country has been overrun by the Chinese for, 60 years now? And he says he's willing to go back. But even so, look at the way he is with people. The happiness that he has. The calmness, the equanimity. So the upshot of these passages is that one of the first steps on the Buddhist path is to realize the uncontrollability and thus the impermanence of these 5 factors. This will in turn lead to the conclusion that none of the bundles is I or me or myself, and that there is no self underlying these suffering generating bundles, just a constantly flowing river of impermanent events. So that was the second reminder. Let's jump on to the third one. Now, this is one you all know about. I'm certain of it. Karma. This is a Sanskrit word meaning action. This is the name given to the basic principle that everything we do in life has some kind of result that comes back to us. As the popular saying has it, what goes around comes around. Whatever I put out will eventually come back to me. The specific impact on me will depend on my motivation when I perform the action. If I act in a self-serving, aggressive way, harming others, then the result will be a negative one, involving suffering and confusion. If I give of myself to others, the result will be positive. So there are 2 important forms of karma in Buddhism. The first is the karma of result. In this case, the past and present circumstances of my life are understood as the results of actions performed by me at a previous time. Everything that we are and everything that has happened to us up to this moment is the result of these prior actions. The fact that we are human beings rather than animals or ghosts or devils indicates a great deal of positive karma from the past. But within this life, our situation is mixed, so we experience a considerable amount of negative circumstances as well. These are seen by Buddhists as the result of prior negative actions of ours. The second kind of karma is the karma of cause, which refers to the actions I perform now, which will condition my own future. If I use others and harm them for my own ends, I will be sowing the seeds of future obstacles, negative circumstances, and sorrow for myself. If I act in a positive way, respecting others and trying to help them, I will sow seeds of good opportunity and happiness. Sometimes the karmic retribution is immediate. If I shout angrily at others or pull at them in a grasping manner, their response is likely to be quick. If I forget to put gas in the car when it's empty, I will run out of gas. If I exhaust myself with overwork and do not heed the warning signs, I may well become sick in body or mind. These and countless other consequences can be painful. They represent the speedy ripening of karma. It's the non-immediate form of karmic retribution that is of greater concern, however. So-called deferred karma lingers and festers. It will often intrude in our lives in a way and in a form that makes it hard to recognize and deal with. At the same time, Buddhists recognize that actions are complex and may produce many levels of karma at the same time. Even immediate retribution does not necessarily exhaust all the karmic seeds of a deed. We often see people in our society operating on the boundary of the law or using their power to harm others, sometimes in an open, flagrant way. At the time, it appears that such people get away with their actions. From the Buddhist perspective, however, no one ever gets away with anything. We will all be held accountable for every negative thing we ever do and will be credited with every positive action as well. And I can't help thinking that this is pretty close to the Baha'i teachings. Maybe not quite as specific, but very close in spirit. So given that Buddhism is non-theistic in the sense that there's no overarching God keeping track of everything we do, how are we held accountable for negative actions and given credit for positive ones? The answer is that everything we do is written in our own bodies and minds. Our state of being includes many layers and levels of awareness. The I or person we are conscious of right now represents only a gross walled off fragment of our overall intelligence, sensitivity, and awareness. You'll remember Sri Aurobindo made many of the same points. Our ego is not very sensitive or intelligent, but beneath it, and for most of us generally unconscious, are deeper and more subtle levels of awareness, all the way down to our Buddha nature. The deeper we go, the more completely open and aware of our state of being is. Nothing we ever do is lost on those deeper levels of ourselves. Nothing. The important thing to understand is that it is from these deeper levels that our emotions, reactions, and habitual patterns emerge. All those things about ourselves that arise outside of the control of our centralized ego. If we continually poison the deep wells of our being with negative actions, of course the water that rises to the surface will be foul and repulsive. But if we continually strive to be kind to others and restrain our own egomania, then this is like purifying the deep well of our own being. The wisdom of adhering to moral and ethical behavior is thus eminently clear from this perspective. So at this point, we've been looking at karma from an individual psychological viewpoint. So far, karma is written in our own hearts. But this is only true at the superficial level of our ego consciousness, where we appear to be completely separate from other people and the world around us. However, at deeper levels of our being, the separation of I and other begins to break down, which is what David Erickson was talking about a little while ago. Let me see, Bill Kelly, would you be willing to read number 10 for me?
The more we begin to gain access to these deeper levels through meditation, the more we begin to see in a vivid and unmistakable way that the realm of the outer or other, including the entire animate and inanimate world, is alive, intelligent, and responsive to the very same degree and in just the same way as our own state of being. In fact, at a certain point, you really cannot separate the two. Our karma is recorded at this deep level where the division of inner and outer, of I and other, does not retain. Thus, it is that karmic retribution occurs in the form either of my own feelings, emotions, and dispositions, or of things that happen to me in my life, seeming to occur randomly, coming from the outside.
That's thought-provoking. Okay, so that was karma.
David or Belinda have their hand up.
Okay.
Well, I'll just make this brief. Actually, Baha'u'llah says the same thing, because somewhere in the writings, he says that inner and outer are the same reality. There is no difference.
Mhm.
One is a mirror of the other. So I don't know what the context is, but before or after that, but what is being said here in number 10? It's basically the same thing.
Yes, it is. Okay. Jack?
I would say from a Baha'i point of view that there are limitations on karmic law. We know, for example, that, I mean, St. Paul says, as a man sows, that he shall also reap. Okay, there's your karmic law stated in another way, in other words. But we have to remember that the prophets, the saints, and the chosen ones, they didn't suffer as a result of their own karmic actions. They suffered as a result of the karmic actions of other people.
Mhm.
So there have to be a few caveats to this, because otherwise, if you take the karmic law as total, acting 100% at all times and in all cases, that would mean that the prophets, the saints, and chosen ones are responsible themselves for the suffering that they that are inflicted upon them, which is clearly not the case.
Yeah.
So there are victims in this world, and I would say there are true victims and false victims. The false victims have somehow set up the situation where what is occurring to them has been generated by themselves. But in other cases, not at all. There are truly innocent souls who suffer because of the guilty.
And
So
another,
if you- yeah.
another way that Baha'i would suggest Christianity too is that there are limitations is when you start looking at the role of grace as conveyed either directly through God or from the manifestations or the holy people that, are their followers, etc. They are capable of overriding some of the karma that people have, I think. Would you agree with that, Jack?
Yes, I would agree with that, but then Baha'u'llah himself says that he willingly endured for our sake the suffering that was imposed upon him, which is the measure of his love. Because he had the power to overturn it all, but he did not use that power to his advantage, which is a tremendous sign of his love for humanity.
And a deep mystery.
And a deep mystery, exactly.
Okay. Bill, you had your hand up there for a while, and then you took it down. Did you answer your own question?
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering if we're supposed to take from this that karma is like a natural product of our behaviors, our actions in the world, or whether we're supposed to take from it that there's this like person with an abacus, or that's keeping track of the good things and the bad things, and that I'm just kind of wondering if it's more of like a stick floating down the river, and because it was thrown in the water, things are going to happen to it. Some of those things are going to be good, and some of things are going to be bad. Or if it's something like we're supposed to feel that there's this higher power that is essentially keeping track of these things and causing these enforcing these kinds of outcomes that one would expect would be natural.
I think in the case of Buddhism, it would have to be the first, that it's really like a natural physical law. That, if you step off a cliff, okay, there are certain consequences to that nobody can change unless they put a trampoline underneath you or something, right? And it's almost immediate. So I suspect it's similar with karma as it's visualized by the Buddhists. But
these natural results, though, would tend to cause a person to be in a position to react to the situation caused from a karmic source. Yep. And that in turn would seem to be contributing to more future karmic results.
You got it exactly right. It's a snowballing effect almost.
So is there a way to like, is your reaction to one karmic thing give you the opportunity to turn that snowball in the other direction?
We're going to talk about all that in great detail next week, because there's one place in the chain of causation where it's possible for you to step back and achieve a non-detachment, or a detachment, shall I say, from the cycle, and say, I don't have to react to it this way. I can choose to do something else. So that's where the whole of Buddhism really grows and prospers, is in that little space between the action of samsara and then the decision that you have to respond to it in kind. So you've picked on a really good point there, Bill. Okay, so let's jump on to the last of the 4 reminders, which is the defects of samsara. Samsara means the condition of going around and around, like we were just talking about with the causes of things. In Tibetan Buddhism, it refers to the cycling from one of the 6 realms of existence to another that sentient beings undergo in accordance with their karma. In the absence of the Dharma and liberation, this cycling is both beginningless and endless. The driving force behind this cycling is the thirst for happiness, satisfaction, fulfillment, and contentment. That thirst is called Trishna and is said to be the defilement that we need to eliminate in order to be free. According to Buddhism, it is a feature of the human state to be continually looking for happiness. Each of us has his or her own collection of ideas of how to accomplish this end. And these are always changing. When we're young, we seek our parents' approval, a new toy or a favorite treat. As we get older, things don't change that much, but now we may crave social acceptance, material possessions, or physical comforts in terms of food, drink, or habitation. The 4th reminder points out that while short-term gratification is sometimes possible, no long-term solution to our desire to be happy can occur as long as we remain within samsara. People in the world obviously do not share the cosmology of traditional Buddhism and aren't necessarily willing to accept the idea of the 6 realms or even the notion of rebirth. Tibetan teachers who are in contact with Westerners have responded in various ways to this lack of acceptance. Some continue to emphasize the traditional presentation that rebirth is a literal reality for everyone, and that each of us will, after death, be born in one of the 6 realms. Other lamas, most often those living and teaching in the West, do not deny the traditional view, but tend to give more experiential and psychological interpretations. Chogyam Trungpa, who I mentioned, presented the endless cycling of samsara as the experience of being trapped in one's own habitual patterns. Samsara then is responding to new situations with the same set of self-defeating neurotic behaviors. He gave a similar reading to the teaching on the 6 realms. While affirming their objective reality, he tended to present them to his students primarily as states of mind that human beings can experience, and that predominate in different kinds of people. The 6 realms became then a kind of typology of 6 different human types, each characterized by the psychology of one or other of the realms. Whether samsara and the 6 realms are regarded as objective or psychological realities, the main point of the 3rd reminder is the same. That's the 4th, I got to check that. Writing myself a note here. Number 11 is Joey's turn.
First, it shows the various ways in which beings are engaged in maintaining themselves. Second, it illustrates the repetitive, self-defeating quality of each realm and each type of psychology. The result aimed for is a clear view that from top to bottom, the Samsaric approach is a bad job. It is guilty of false advertising. It does not and cannot produce the desired results and should be abandoned. The only hope one has for any kind of human fulfillment is to renounce samsaric values and goals and strive for the liberation of enlightenment. Reginald Ray, Indestructible Truth.
Author's message. Huh? Yeah, false advertising. So I want to talk about something called conditioned arising or dependent origination. We're going to go into more detail about this next week, but I wanted to focus on just introducing it tonight. So a doctrine closely related to the 4 Noble Truths, particularly the second one, the cause of suffering, is called conditioned arising, conditioned co-production, or dependent origination. The understanding of conditioned arising is so central to Buddhist practice and development that the Buddha's chief disciple, Sariputta, says, "One who sees dependent origination sees the Dharma. One who sees the Dharma sees dependent origination." The Buddha himself referred to it, together with nirvana, as the profound, difficult to see Dharma that he understood as his awakening. Those 2 things alone. He also taught that rebirth continues until such understanding is attained. Okay, I think this is our last reading for tonight. Anyway, let's, Danielle, how about you? Number 12.
This Dhamma, the 4 Noble Truths that I have attained, is profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation delights in attachment, takes delight in attachment, rejoices in attachment. It is hard for such a generation to see this truth, namely specific conditionality, dependent origination. And it is hard to see this truth, namely the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. The Buddha, the middle-length discourses of the Buddha.
So there are 12 links, or nidanas as they're called, in conditioned arising or dependent origination. They're helpful because they show in a clear and unmistakable way how karma actually works, illustrating how our current situation is the result of past actions and how our present actions will determine our future circumstances. The stream of dharmas that makes up the experience of each individual is unique and reflects the particular karma of that person. Actions that we take in the present affect the arising and non-arising of dharmas in our future. In this way, we can influence the direction of our life if we choose. The 12 links also address the all-important question of free will, indicating where, from the Buddhist point of view, our lives are determined and unfree, and just where human freedom can be found. Finally, they show how past, present, and future are karmically linked to one another. The 12 links played a central role in the life of the Buddha. When Gautama attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, we are told that he did so by seeing the 12 links. When the Buddha saw these 12 links, he understood how everything that arises does so based on karma. At that moment, he attained enlightenment. He used this 12-stage formula to explain karma, rebirth, and the functioning of personality, all without the need to invoke a permanent self. Whatever happiness or unhappiness arises, whatever pleasurable or painful circumstance occurs, it does so in accordance with the unfolding of karma, as the result of the ripening of the totality of the past. The operation of karma occurs even at the most subtle and seemingly insubstantial levels of our lives. Every thought that arises, every perception that happens, every feeling and emotion that we experience, all happen as the inevitable and unavoidable results of the totality of past karma. Within this framework, there is no independent, substantial I to be found. The principle of conditionality states that all things, mental or physical, arise and exist due to the presence of certain conditions, and cease once those conditions are removed. Therefore, nothing other than nirvana is independent. This doctrine of dependent origination thus complements the teaching that no permanent independent self can be found. No substantial self can be found which underlies the links, owning and operating them. They simply occur according to conditions. Thus, it is inappropriate to ask who craves. Rather, it is appropriate to ask what is craving conditioned by? The answer being feeling. While the 5 aggregate doctrine is an analysis of the components of personality in static form, the 12 link formula is a synthesis which shows how such components dynamically interact to form the living process of personality in one life and from life to life. Buddhism sees the basic root of the pain and stress of life as spiritual ignorance rather than sin.
Mark, could I just mention that, this dependent origination is a kind of a fancy philosophical, theological term. It may be helpful to simply think of it as a doctrine, a teaching on causality.
Yeah.
Causality.
Yes, it is.
or cause and effect. In other words, if you do this, this will be the result.
That's exactly right.
If you eliminate this, the thing will also cease to exist. So it's kind of a cold blue steel, almost scientific doctrine, but working on the psychological level. And we've already seen just how psychological Buddhism is.
Mhm.
I don't know if eventually you're going to talk about reincarnation, but I wanted to say that from my point of view, Buddha was actually, in spite of what Buddhists and Hindus say, he was teaching not for, but against Buddhism, reincarnation. This is my understanding, because they say once you defeat the karmic wheel of samsara by entering into nirvana, at that point, subsequent reincarnations cease to exist.
Right.
So reincarnation is a sense a curse.
Yeah.
You want to get out of that cycle. And the way to get out of it is by attaining nirvana. So I see that teaching as an implicit, if not an explicit, criticism of the commonly held belief in reincarnation.
I
That's fair.
totally agree with that.
Yep.
That's also accounts for Hindu versions of reincarnation and Sikh versions of reincarnation. Reincarnation is a failure to attain the goal of life.
That's right.
Yeah.
Bill, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wondered if this is not too far out there for this discussion, whether this karma thing can be extrapolated to communities and societies as
Yes,
having
it can.
as a totality their own karma.
Yep. People have gone there. That's true. But I'm not going to get into that because it's much too complicated. Okay, Harold, you had a comment?
Oh, yes. You know, Mark, there's an unborn in Buddhism. And the Buddha says if there were not an unborn, there would be no escape from the born.
That's right.
So we shouldn't say things like there's no God in Buddhism. You know, from an interfaith diplomacy point of view, I find that it's not a helpful thing to say. It makes people who believe in God stop learning from Buddhism as soon as they say that.
Mhm.
So it's much better, I think, to say Buddhism has a transcendent, impersonal form of divine reality, like the unborn, without which there would be no escape from the born. In other words, all of Buddhism depends on an unborn eternal realm, without which none of the rest of it makes any sense whatsoever. So it's to me utterly ironic that Buddhism is called non-theistic, or completely different than all the other faith traditions. There are concepts like Dharmakaya and lots of transcendent notions in Buddhism. Anyway, but you said before, since there's no God, and I don't use that language, and I don't find it helpful for interfaith understanding to speak of Buddhism as if there were no divine reality taught in it.
And interestingly enough, that was a quote from somebody I was reading.
Well, there's a lot of false quotes about different faiths. It's not easy to understand them. I make false quotes myself, but turning to the Buddha directly, he said, there is an unborn realm, O monks. Were there not, there would be no escape from the born.
He also referred to it as the unoriginated.
Perfect. Yeah. Lots of names. The more names, the better for the transcendent ultimate. I think there's lots of names for the ultimate in Buddhism.
That whole passage, Harold, you're referring to really, to me, sounds like a definition of God. And of course, both Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi said that it's impossible that the Buddha did not teach God, for he was a manifestation of God. And that's why they said that, his followers do not possess his original teachings, because surely the God teaching was part of his original teachings, but it has somehow disappeared, regrettably.
Okay, I just want to motor on here so I can get through in the next 5 minutes. So Buddhism then sees the basic root of the pain and stress of life as spiritual ignorance, rather than sin, which is a willful turning away from a creator God. We may think of it as having a doctrine of original sinlessness instead of sinfulness. So I have several versions of the 12 links to show you. Tonight we'll only look at one, which provides a bare bones presentation of the 12 links. So here's, let me see, this is the one right here. So the diagram should be read in a clockwise direction, starting with ignorance at the top. Okay, so right in the center in the blue is ignorance. The first two links, ignorance and mental formations, are part of the past life immediately preceding this one. They show that part of our past life is pertinent to the present one. They illustrate the Buddhist belief that it is not possible to have a present without a closely supporting past existence. Okay, then the word ignorance here refers not to not knowing the Four Noble Truths and to taking the impersonal rise and fall of the 5 links, or 5 aggregates, I beg your pardon, to be a solid, enduring self. Our present life depends on our having maintained this ignorance in our past life. The fact that we failed to realize our own non-existence in our past lifetime has provided the necessary ground for this present life to arise. Now, the mental formations are also known as karmic formations or samskaras in Sanskrit. Each samsaric being shares the same ignorance, but we differ in terms of the particular bundle of karma we carry around. Actions based on passion, aggression, and delusion that we committed in the past have left a karmic imprint on our consciousness that expresses itself sooner or later. In traditional terms, those actions have sown karmic seeds in our alaya, our deepest consciousness, that will ripen and become manifest at some point in the future. These karmic imprints or seeds are karmic formation, predispositions, if you like. In conjunction with ignorance from our past lifetime, then, karmic formations give birth to our present existence. So that's as far as we're going to go with that diagram tonight. Next week, we'll look at it in more detail beyond that. So you'll have noticed that I distributed 3 supplementary articles for those of you who are interested in further details of the topics we've addressed this evening. What does samsara mean in Buddhism? The 5 skandhas and the 12 links of dependent origination. They're all written by a woman called Barbara O'Brien and can be found on the Learn Religions website, which is learnreligions.com. That's a worthwhile place to go. Let me just stop sharing. See who's still here. Oh my goodness. I missed you all. I couldn't see most of you.